we have to really start with how fundamentally powerful culture is, all forms of culture, including visual art, music, language.
We can rebuild buildings, we can rebuild bridges, we can rebuild schools, but if we do not incorporate our story, our art and our culture, our history.
A cultural framework. The theme for our community is community, culture, and commerce. And that's not just what Ashe says, that's what everybody says.
Part of the creative placemaking work is not about arts and culture on its own, but arts and culture as it is integrated in how we think of healthy communities.
What's important to you, what's important to me, how might we use arts and culture to advance our joint missions?
Bonjour, good morning, welcome. My name is Durio. I'm the assistant to the mayor president here in Lafayette Parish, Old Robideau, and I run the CREATE program, which is a new initiative by the mayor. It's an acronym for Culture, Recreation, Entertainment, Arts, Tourism, Economy. We'll hear about that a little bit more today. But I want to be the first to welcome you to Lafayette Day of Semaine Francophonie. We have an exciting day planned for you, and we have a lot of partners in the room that I want to kind of do a little quick thank you to all of our partners. Centre International is here, will also be speaking later. Nicodemus, celebrating 50 years this year, will also be here. LCBC, our Lafayette Convention and Visitors Commission, is here and helped with breakfast, so thank you very much. Centre also helped with breakfast, as did Food Parts. Alliance Française de Lafayette is also here and helped put on today. And then we have a lot of representatives from the state coming in today from Culture, Recreation, and Tourism who will also be speaking to you and who are always a helpful resource to us. And last but not least, I want to thank ACA for allowing us to be in this beautiful space today. And I want to introduce Bree Sargent, who can just do a quick little welcome for you guys as we start our day here, and then I'll come back and introduce Anne.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, I'm Bree Sargent. I am the Education Director here at the ACA, and I'm also one of the Interim Executive Directors. We are so happy to have you all here, and I hope that you have maybe had some time to visit our space and check things out. A little housekeeping, restrooms are right there, so you can kind of get to them through that. If you haven't had a chance to check out some of our galleries, I welcome you to do that today at some point. We have a beautiful exhibition in our main gallery, which you can actually see from the overlook right there, that you should absolutely see. We're also very lucky in that we have Tina Gerard, who is the artist. We have her niece here with us. So she might, Amy right here, she might actually tour you around if you ask her nicely. And you can get kind of an insider's look. Tina was also one of the founding members of the Artists Alliance, which also has a retrospective exhibit. That was a group of artists who formed in 1986 to sort of come together as visual artists and give themselves a larger platform. So there's a beautiful exhibition with works by many of the artists who have were members of that. We have an exhibition in the vault. This was a bank. This used to be a bank. And so the original vault is here, worth checking out. And nothing's happening in our theater, but we also have a lovely 300-seat theater that we do performances year-round in. So check it out if you want to if you have any questions about anything. A lot of the ACA staff are in the room today and certainly around, so definitely ask if you want to check anything out. But thank you all so much for being here. I hope you had a great week, and we'll continue with this fantastic day. Thanks.
A little bit taller than Brie, I didn't realize that. Well, I like to tell people when you talk about creative placemaking that Festival International is actually one of the best examples of creative placemaking that I've ever seen, because every street edge is activated, every empty surface parking lot is animated. You really feel the energy in downtown during Festival International. So while we're not throwing a specific party for you guys like the rest of the cities tonight, I hope that Festival International will do for you. So thank you to the festival for putting on such an amazing event each and every year. We're very lucky to have that. I actually have some friends visiting, and they were so impressed by how the city just embraces Festival International, and it's always like a magical time, I think, in Lafayette. So to that point, I know that you guys in each city have been talking about creative placemaking, and today our creative placemaking project is actually going to take the shape of a parade or a tintamarre today at 4 p.m. to the Omni Center, which is down Jefferson Street. So a little treat for you is over lunch, Congrès Mondial is going to actually bring in supplies so you can make your own noisemakers over lunch, so a little creative break for you in your day, and then we'll use those noisemakers in the tintamarre to the Omni Center at the end of the day. So just a little heads up for that, so start thinking about those things. I also want to let you know that there's some flyers on the table about a Create Louisiana film grant for Louisiana filmmakers. It's a Francophone film grant. It's a $30,000 film grant. So just wanted to make sure you guys all knew about that, and please tell some friends so we can get some really great submissions for that. I also want to introduce Maud Julia Blanchette. She's visiting from Quebec City. She's with the Logique program. She's working at visiting, yes. This is our first Logique in City Hall, and she's working with us for 3 months on a bunch of different Francophone efforts. She's also plays the viola, fiddle, and cello, and she's also a master luthier. So she's been working at solo violins. And you'll see her at the Cajun Jam each and every Wednesday, but she's leaving next week, so we're all very, just sweet trees. So we have a question for you, for the group.
Ok, so first in French. Alors, connaissez-vous combien pèse un ours polaire?
If you didn't, do you have some guesses? If you didn't, don't speak French, what she asked is, do you know how much a polar bear weighs? And the answer is...
Assez pour briser la glace. Enchantée, je m'appelle Maud.
She said, I don't know either, but enough to break the ice. Hello, my name is Kate. Nice to meet you. So now that we're all laughing and know each other, I'm going to introduce Gadwa Nicodemus. Come up. She is the co-author of the NEA white paper on creative placemaking, and she and Ann Markson basically defined this term for us. So they're both here today as a special treat, and so I'd like to welcome Ann and Gadwa Nicodemus up.
Merci. Bonjour. Bonjour. Bienvenue. Je parle peu français seulement, so apologies. This is a talk about creative placemaking. It's a week of exploring creative placemaking. So I want to start by talking a little bit about place. So I travel a lot all over the country, and wherever you go, people want to say, where are you from? Right? D'où êtes-vous? Is that right? So, where are you from? Anyone? Lafayette. Lafayette? Show of hands. Beyond the new?
Arnaudville.
Arnaudville. Who here is from Arnaudville? Welcome. Beyond the new. Haiti? Haiti? What about
New Brunswick.
New Brunswick?
Prairie Laurent.
Very good. Very good. Quebec, anyone? NUNU? What about from Cecilia? Bien. Anyone else? Who hasn't shared?
Prince Edward Island.
Prince Edward Island. Welcome. Welcome. So we have many people from many places here, and we're all trying to engage around how we can do cultural development to improve our communities and really honor the people and try to get community goals going. So I wanted to just briefly introduce myself. So my name is Gadwa Nicodemus, and I am principal of Metris Arts Consulting. And this is what we believe. We believe in the power of culture to enrich people's lives and help communities thrive. And we believe those benefits should be broadly shared and inclusively developed. And our mission, we strive to provide high-caliber planning, research, and evaluation services to reveal art's impacts and to help communities equitably improve cultural vitality. So to accelerate change, we seek to share knowledge and amplify the voices of those closest to the work. And so actually a lot of what I'm going to be doing today here is really storytelling, sharing examples and case studies from around this country that I thought had particular relevance to this audience from Louisiana and beyond. So hopefully I honor their voices and it resonates for you. So as Kate mentioned, Ann Markuson and I had the unique privilege of co-authoring this white paper for the National Endowment for the Arts in 2010. And it really helped to define the field. We researched 14 case studies ranging from tiny towns to big cities, including Philadelphia Mural Arts Program, where an anti-graffiti experiment evolved into the nation's largest mural arts program, and cross-sector projects actually span collaborations with the streets department and area youth to extensive work within the criminal justice system. The 01 SJ Biennial, a series of festivals to marry Silicon Valley's artistic talent and technical prowess. And Acadiana's own NUNU's experiments was in the original white paper. So as many of you know, where artist George Marks helped lead the cultivation of Arnaudville's artistic talents and its unique Cajun and Creole heritage, cultural heritage to help to reverse the decline in the town. We offered this definition. Creative placemaking is a process in which partners from the public, private, nonprofit, and community sectors strategically shape the physical and social character of a town, tribe, neighborhood, city, or region around arts and cultural activities. So that's a mouthful, but ultimately there are three main elements in this original definition. So there's cross-sector action, there's action by cross-sector partners, a core of arts and cultural activities, and it's rooted in place. And I also wanted to point out that this definition is evolving. So Ann Markuson and I helped offer an initial definition, but the term and the field of practice is evolving. And we have gotten some improvements, I'd say, to this definition over the years. So for one, people have taken us to task for this emphasis on cross-sector partnerships, not giving necessarily enough attention to the grassroots community residents. You know, the onus was maybe more on the leadership and working across sectors than necessarily including the people from the community. So I think that that's an important improvement on that definition. As Maria Rosario Jackson in her keynote yesterday in Washington spoke to, I think that this strategic action by cross-sector partners, we can also think more expansively about that. It's not just cross-sector, but she expanded that to cross-programmatic, cross-disciplinary. So that's another important improvement on the term. Our definition also spoke to outcomes of creative placemaking, that it animates public and private space, it rejuvenates structures and streetscapes, it improves local business viability and public safety, and it brings diverse people together to celebrate, inspire, and be inspired. So with this, creative placemaking encompasses a range of outcomes. Economic outcomes, social outcomes, physical outcomes. It includes the intrinsic benefits of arts and culture, but it also expands, so it's not just limited to that. So this emphasis on cross-sector partnership and cross-disciplinary, cross-mission, I think that's an important concept. You know, it's really about working with people that you might not consider a natural ally, unusual partners, unusual suspects, and trying to say, what is the sweet spot of shared value? What's important to you? What's important to me? How might we use arts and culture to advance our joint missions? So trying to distill what that shared value is for you and your community partners. So let's just do another little show of hands here. So do we have any elected officials in the room? Not yet. Who here identifies as an artist? Okay, we've got some artists. Now what about those of you that might be what I call the culture bearer? So you work to preserve your cultural traditions, including language. Any culture bearers in the room? Welcome, welcome. Great. People that work in tourism? Any tourism people? All right, a couple people. Who am I missing? Where do you work? What are you passionate about?
Arts administration.
Arts administration, very good. Anyone else?
Government.
Government. So not an elected official, but you work in government. So the question is, you know, who in the room and then who outside of the room could you possibly work with to try to advance priorities for you and for them, but using arts and culture? So this 2010 white paper for the National Endowment for the Arts, actually have paper copy if anyone wants to look at it. There are only like 5 more left, so I will take it back with me at the end of the day, but you can pass it around. And it's available online on metrisarts.com as well as the NEA. But this effort really helped catalyze renewed interest and momentum for this type of work, even though the work had been ongoing for decades in a range of cities and towns across the US and really across the world, but it was just a new framing that got some energy and momentum and excitement around this work. So I wanted to move into some storytelling, and this is a case study about Ajo, Arizona, and it's an in-depth look at one particular project that had support from the NEA through this Our Town grant program that the white paper helps catalyze, and it's a rural community. They also got support from Art Place, which was another important foundation that came about, actually a collaboration of many different foundations across the country and federal partnerships to try to support this work. So the International Sonora Desert Alliance, ISDA, is not an art-specific organization, but it's been lucky enough to have received NEA Art Town and Art Place support, and it's used creative placemaking to bring people together, activate spaces that hold historic significance, and spur tourism. So Ajo, Arizona is a rural town with about 3,300 year-round residents. It's just east of the Tohono O'odham Nation, which is the second largest Indian nation in the United States. Phoenix is about 2 hours northeast, and the US-Mexico border is 40 miles to the south. So as you might imagine, this area is what they call tri-national. They have people of Native American, Anglo, and Mexican descent who all live there. Now, Ajo is an old mining town, and it has a history of segregation in terms of housing and jobs. Historically, natives only had access to the most dangerous jobs. Mexicans had access to slightly better jobs, but only Anglos could be the managers. And during this time, the only places where people gathered across racial and ethnic difference was in the town plaza and the schools. And now many of these places are on the National Registry of Historic Places. So about 10 years ago, local artists asked ISDA to adopt and renovate an old school into artist live workspaces. Now ISDA worked with ArtSpace, an organization that develops artist housing, live workspace, and other art spaces. And ISDA held a community meeting where 400 people showed up to discuss the future of the school. Now ISDA attracted people by incorporating local arts organizations and artisans into the meeting. And ArtSpace challenged ISDA to raise a lot of money, $9.6 million, which took a considerable amount of time, 3.5 years. And during this time, ISDA used arts and culture to animate the school to create a broad sense of community ownership. They organized workshops, painted murals, and hosted events in front of the school. And after 18 months of construction, in which the contractors were required to hire locally, now there's a community indoor-outdoor performance space, and the artist live workspace is full. And ISDA is now also working on renovating the Ajo Plaza, which is also on the National Registry of Historic Places, which is going to have spaces for local artists to sell their wares, tourists to stay, and a commercial kitchen. And when it came time for construction, ISDA leveraged dollars for the creative facilities to develop a workforce development and GED program. So again, using arts and culture, but to advance different missions and different agendas for community partners. So part of the reason why this was so important is that even though Ajo isn't segregated anymore, there's still stark disparities in terms of income. About 30% of the entire Ajo population is low income, but 76% of the native population is low income. And in ISDA's workforce development programs, young people learn to make instruments, tiles for murals, and garden. And ISDA also developed a registered apprenticeship program in building maintenance and repair. So the young people work towards a 4,000-hour certificate, and all participants in the program go through a peer support process where they develop financial skills. So using arts and culture to bring people together to animate a historically significant cultural site, and also finding ways to marry that to other objectives like workforce development and GED training, and having that training still have cultural relevance and significance through the gardening and things like that. So I wanted to segue to the question of why artists are effective leaders in community development. Some community developers tend to see the role of artists in fairly limited ways. So, stereotypically, what do artists do in terms of community development? Oh, they paint a mural, right? That's the first thing that you might think of. Or perhaps, oh, they're great at engaging youth in an after-school program or youth development work. But artists can actually contribute much more profoundly, especially if they're given the authority to act in leadership roles. So in Metris's Not Just Murals report, which was commissioned by LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, we explored this question. And we synthesized 9 case studies, including Cry One, which is right here in Louisiana. It's an immersive arts experience that strives to explore the relationship between land and culture in Louisiana, particularly the impacts of its loss after Hurricane Katrina. The People's Paper Co-op, which in Philadelphia, which connects formerly incarcerated people with artists and lawyers to empower them with the tools they need to advocate for themselves, their families, and their communities. For instance, I just got an email today for a workshop where community members could come and meet with lawyers and learn how to expunge their criminal records. And Django's Playhouse, an artist live workspace whose leadership also works towards empowering community members so that future developments reflect community interest, equity values, and a cognizance of local history. And through all of this research, we surfaced some critical skills that artists embody as leaders in community development. And I share them here, and just briefly, first, artists can surface community knowledge by asking questions and listening deeply. They can use imagination and vision to bring fresh eyes to community work. They're often prepared for uncertainty and risk that's inherent in community change. They can be adept at collaborating in cross-sectoral teams, and they can help community members advance into leadership roles. So others that might not necessarily be leaders yet, they're able to mentor them. Now, it's important to just, when you're looking at this list, to bear in mind that this doesn't mean that every artist is good at these things, nor does it mean that every artist wants to be a leader in community development. I mean, some are very, their goals and interests are to have a studio practice, or for the performing arts to perform their music or to perform their dance or theater, and that is fine, that is valid, but for those that are interested in working in community development, these are the types of critical skills that we saw surfacing in the case studies that we looked at in terms of how artists can play leadership roles. So I wanted to pause there and just break for a few comments from the audience. Looking at this list, does this resonate with your own experience of how artists might contribute as leaders to community development? Is there anything that's missing, or would you offer a friendly amendment to what is written here? So just one or two comments if anyone has any reflection on how this resonates for you.
It makes me wonder if there should be training for artists in leadership.
And tell me your name again.
Amy.
So Amy, just so you have it in your recording, Amy wonders if there should be training for artists as leaders in community development. And there are some training programs. EMC Arts has an interesting training program that you can apply for it, and it brings together teams of artists and city leaders. I know there's another one that I'm blanking on right now, but whenever my organization, Metris, comes across these training opportunities, we disseminate them. Springboard for the Arts has, and what is it called? They have a toolkit.
Yeah. I've seen that.
Do you remember the name of the?
No.
Well, you can contact me and I will follow up with the particular names, but there are organizations that offer trainings and also offer resources for how, that you can even crowdsource and contribute to figure out how to do this more effectively so that people aren't continually reinventing the wheel. Any other reactions, friendly amendments, things that are missing? You look a little confused. Yeah? Do you have anything to say?
No, I was just, I was thinking about one thing. I understand that you want training for artists that in leadership. I mean, most of the churches, or some churches that one that I attend, that we discuss leadership.
Yeah.
As being a follower versus being a leader. I was trying to find a way to incorporate it in my situation that I'm confronted in my community with.
Definitely. And I think there are lots of ways to lead, and that this first point, artists can surface community knowledge by asking questions and listening deeply. I mean, that points to the type of leadership that maybe your church is advocating, so following. So, first you have to listen. So you don't just come and, trails, something blazing, what's the expression? Guns blazing. Guns blazing, thank you, that's it, guns blazing, okay, this is what we're going to do. But some artists are very skilled and attuned to sort of listening to what the pulse is in the community, and then leading, not necessarily with a guns blazing model, but leading as a follower too. So yeah. Yeah, and the other point that you make is that it's not that artists have a monopoly on being leaders in community development. I mean, far from it. So their churches are another player. But when you work with an artist, these are the types of skills that they can add that might not necessarily be as prevalent from other trainings or other sectors, right? So if you are working in economic development, you might not be as in touch with your creative processes, things like that, right? Well, I want to share another story with you, another case. Okay, so now we are going to Fargo, North Dakota. Population about 120,000. Has anyone here ever been to Fargo? No, okay. Oh, I see one hand in the back. Great. So I wanted to talk about this project for a few reasons. I think it's a great illustration of the unique ways in which artists can play leadership roles in community development, as we were just talking about. And then, as you'll see, I think there are some parallels between environmental resilience that a lot of Louisiana faces in terms of water and flooding and what they're facing here in Fargo. So, one thing about Fargo, it's very flat. It's also on the Red River, which floods from time to time. And since the 1970s, development in the city requires these stormwater management systems that grew to include a network of basins to briefly hold the excess stormwater. And these water collection areas can take up many acres. And often the basins are dry, and they seem to have purpose only during the rainfall. They're uninviting empty lots with little plants and little wildlife diversity. And when the drainage basins were installed, there was little attention paid to the aesthetics and the functional impact that they would actually have on the neighborhoods. So these basins were often put in the middle of urban areas, cutting off residents from one another. And many of these basins are located in neighborhoods that serve immigrants, refugee populations, and low to moderate income families. So a New York-based environmental artist, Jackie Bruckner, led a series of engaging community conversations about flooding and stormwater. And this helped the city recognize that it needed to upgrade the basins into civic spaces that would add value to the neighborhoods. And recognizing that this kind of design work often happens in a silo, the artist challenged the city, how can we build better? Could these basins be a place that enhances people's lives? Could they be neighborhood commons? So the city saw an opportunity to turn a pilot site into a civic asset by using an artist-led process to imagine and create more ecological and aesthetic solutions that would connect residents with these basins. So the initial pilot targeted one 18-acre drainage basin. And this artist, Jackie Bruckner, and a city planner put together a community advisory team that hired local artists to make up an on-the-ground engagement team. And in 2011, the city of Fargo and the artist applied for and received some seed money from the National Endowment for the Arts to do outreach 6 months before the kickoff redesign events to begin the redesign process. The goal of this outreach was to inform residents about the project, to seek their knowledge about observations of the space in the neighborhood, and to invite their participation in the first We Design Charette event. So for instance, some of the outreach events included a bowl-a-thon, and artists threw pots. They threw 350 rounded rectangular clay bowls to reflect the shape of the retention pond. And the finished bowls were then placed at the neighborhood residents' doorsteps. as invitations to the celebration and the We Design charrette workshop. A local artist and a local art student and a master puppeteer worked with local artists to set up a puppet show in the parking lot of an apartment complex near the basin with a focus on water. And there are lots of renters who live around the basin, so it was particularly important to engage these residents. And at the We Design event, there was a welcome ceremony with a Native American drum circle and dancers in the celebration. And participants created models in sandboxes shaped like the basin. And they could add rocks or flowers. And this engaging technique proved particularly useful for those for whom English wasn't their first language. And then the artists and landscape architects were given these models and were able to use them to improve the designs. Whereas if they were trying to express their ideas with language, there would have been more barriers. So from the activities and discussions, the project team condensed this information into 4 different aspects which really seemed to stand out as important to the community. More plants, more spaces for celebration, spaces to exercise, and an emphasis on the elements. And the result is this World Common Gardens. It's a place where people can come and play, enjoy music and other performances, and see native wildlife. So some of the impacts beyond just the creation of the commons themselves. First of all, just the number of people that were engaged in the design process. The city is pretty confident that without the variety of the creative outreach efforts, they wouldn't have had the same turnout at events. They would never have gotten the same type of people to participate. Residents came together across difference. There were Native Americans, Scandinavian Americans, and refugees from Africa and other countries. Now, local artist Dwight Nicholson has now stepped into the role of project artist. And interestingly, consultants on the project, like landscape architects, have hired him separately to work on their other projects. So they're seeing the value that having an artist involved from the very beginning can lead to this process. And the city hopes to invite artists to the table for future projects too. And then it's also helped leverage funding. So since their initial NEA grant, the city has now gotten funding from Art Place America, the North Dakota Outdoor Heritage Fund, and the Kresge Foundation to pursue similar work. So I'd also like for us to consider what communities can do in order to promote arts and culture-led economic development in rural areas and in low-income neighborhoods. I mean, I think we've been talking a lot about the power that art and culture have to bring different communities together and to advance different social objectives. But people also want to know about dollars and cents. So this is something that we explored in another recent report for LISC, More Than Storefronts, and I'll also pass around a copy of that. So when we explored this topic, again, we drew on 6 different case studies. I'll just briefly share some examples. The Community Arts Stabilization Trust CAST, which is in San Francisco. It's a coalition that aids small and mid-sized arts nonprofits in securing permanently affordable space, like this is Counterpulse, for instance, a dance and performance nonprofit dedicated to community engagement. So in San Francisco, they have this tension of how do you have permanently affordable space when it's such a hot real estate market. So this was a way to try to address that need. Fountain Square, which is a neighborhood in Indiana that transformed from dramatic economic decline to a stable hub for culture through a series of investments. LISC was an investor, the Southeast Neighborhood Development, so a community development corporation, and the private sector. Another example we looked at was Project Storefronts in New Haven, Connecticut, which is an entity that cultivates relationships with property owners of vacant and underutilized spaces, and then grants businesses temporary access for free or reduced rates. So from all of the different case studies we looked at, we synthesized some key approaches that communities can adopt to advance arts and culture-led economic development. So I wanted to share them here. First of all, that it's important to try to build relationships and networks between artists, arts organizations, and possible funders. So the importance of trying to establish places for artists to work and to connect by advocating for policies and programs that will enable them to acquire, design, and maintain suitable spaces. Supporting intermediation, and so I know that's maybe some jargon that everyone's familiar with, but what it really means is to try to foster an infrastructure of cooperation for businesses and residents to support, to coordinate activities and access investments and business support programs. So a lot of what Semaine de la Francophonie is doing is really trying to cultivate relationships and so that you can cooperate on efforts. So it's really part of this intermediation goal. Leverage the community building power of cultural participation. I think that's another goal that we've seen really emphasized through a lot of this week. And identify, recruit, and support local minority artists and arts organizations so that these benefits are not inequitably distributed, but really trying to pay attention to all of the cultural assets you have in the community and prioritize some of those that maybe historically have had less access to resources. So does anyone want to offer a friendly amendment to this list? I know here in Louisiana, a lot of the focus is more on exploring how arts and culture can support tourism, which I think that the case study that we're about to go into will give some more insights into. This research we did for LISC was really looking at rural communities and low-income communities and about how that region might serve to attract more people from the area, but not quite so externally tourist-focused. But do these make sense to you? Anything from your practice when you're talking about how to foster arts and culture for economic development that you would want to add? What's important that's maybe missing from this list?
I think like art from inception, like trying to inject creativity from like not later, not as an add-on, but from approach is maybe something.
So Kate was saying the importance of having art evolve from the beginning of the process and not as an add-on. And this is something that I think came up yesterday too in Maria Rosario Jackson's talk. A lot of times, and again with our sort of stereotype about the role of artists as how they might lead in community development, we might think about them only as creator of an art object. Okay, they might make a mural or they might make a sculpture, but a lot of the value that they bring is actually the process, this creative process and working through the very beginning. And so maybe you don't have an artistic outcome, but it's the ways in which engaging different community participants through creative processes has informed that approach. Or just having, I think his name was Ed Lebo he used to work for the City of Phoenix Public Art Program, and he said the value of having an artist at the table is making room to ask the impertinent question. And I think that has a lot of relevance in terms of what artists can bring to the creative process. But just having someone who sees things differently, who can say, why is that the status quo? What if we did it this way? Take it back. But Kate, does that speak to some of what you observed from your work?
Yeah.
Great. Any other comments? Yes, in the back?
Yeah, I think that's super important, asking those large questions. Also the idea of interaction and how artists can look at a place, like a room, and go, how does this contribute to people interacting, about the various arts interacting? And I think sometimes we look at things as just, discrete and not how it all comes together. And I think artists have that, many artists have that ability to look at things from a lot of different perspectives and angles, which is really important in communities and in spaces.
Yeah, so more holistic thinking. Does anyone disagree with that? Anyone think artists actually are just as siloed?
I'd like to make a comment about that, because I usually get tasked with doing like Arts and Culture Day for leadership programs for the business community. And one thing I've learned is that there is mutual intimidation from like the people in business and artists. And I feel like the artists need to have a little bit more confidence in that, because they feel like they're not of the same cloth as the business community. But the business community, meanwhile, is just so in awe of what artists do, and they have such respect for what they do. There's like this mutual respect, but it's like this block. So they're not talking to each other because they're intimidated by each other.
Yeah, I do think, I used to be a choreographer, dancer, and an arts administrator I was a dancer age 7 to 27, and worked in arts administration from college to 27. And I think that the sort of the dominant mindset that particularly those of us that work in the nonprofit arts and culture sector, I'm sure the Hollywood's a different story, but you know, if you're meeting with city officials or trying to get a corporate sponsorship, I mean, you come in sort of hat in hand and, you know, please sir, may I have some more, this idea of being a supplicant. One of the things that I think is exciting about the creative placemaking frame is that it's actually drawing out unique value that artists and arts organizations and culture bearers bring to these other sectors that are interested in community development or economic development. And so, you know, recognizing that you have assets to bring to the table and articulating them. Now that said, one also has to be very mindful that there are serious power dynamics and imbalances in the room, right? And so just paying attention to those dynamics and trying to say, okay, who's not even in the room? Who's not at the table? What's our responsibility as people doing this work, as people potentially benefiting from this work, to try to pay attention to those dynamics of equity and power as well. Okay, what was your
I was reflecting on the bottom one about recruiting and supporting minority artists and arts organizations. That there's a balance between using established artists. They bring attention to your project and so forth. And I understand that, but it's just to encourage the organizations or people in places of authority to include take a chance and work with new artists that aren't so well known. There's a balance.
Yeah. So you brought out these questions of new versus emerging, although I know a lot of artists do not like the term emerging, but newer to the work, less I will just stop there. But there's also another tension around whether to use a local artist or a big name artist from another area, right? That's another tension one has to mitigate, and just trying to think about what's strategic, what's fair, but also can there be ways to have mentoring opportunities? So maybe, like in Fargo, it was a New York City-based artist, but they found lots of opportunities to bring in local artists and to maybe pair them and give them the skills and training that they might not have had from the beginning, but could acquire through this process by working with this other artist. So are there ways, to build in that virtuous circle? So I want to share one more. Did you want to jump in?
I just want to say one thing real quick, and this kind of takes it back to the very basics of all of it. Is that what we've run into a lot, and what I have run into, is that when you're trying to look at possible initiatives, that sometimes it goes back to just having an initial conversation of what is art, because I could be talking to somebody for a half hour, and I'm thinking of art and artists in a number of genres, and that person is thinking about someone who creates a painting on the wall, and that's all they see in terms of art. So I know that has been an issue at times when we're working with communities to really define what is art and what is creativity.
Yeah, can you summarize that?
Yeah, so the comment was how sometimes you really need to start with just surfacing what art means to a community. You know, you might come in and you might think, oh, well, I think all sorts of disciplines, or I'm including culinary arts. You didn't say this, but I'll just riff off of it. But you know, but what does that community member think of when you say art? And I think we heard about this yesterday with Maria's talk as well. So you know, sometimes just the name art, period, you don't see your community's creative expression reflected in that because you think that it's only occurring in a gallery or in a museum or in a theater. But you know, the singing that you might do in church, or you know, if it's restoring an antique car just so, you know, those are other types of creative expression. And so how do we form something that's inclusive? So, you know, it may be coming up with different terms. So one of the terms that we like to use is artists and culture bearers. That seems to be a little bit more inclusive. And you know, I know that Carol Babel from HDI, who was one of the other keynotes for this week, often uses that term and approach. Not necessarily asking where art happens, but asking where are sites of creative expression in your community, and really just trying to, you know, say what's appropriate. You know, are we talking about the culinary arts? How does it interact with community gardens? I mean, is that a cultural expression, or is that just another awesome community development type thing, right? So good questions. I do want to move to one other case study, and then we'll have more time for Q&A at the end. So I want to talk about St. Helena Island. And it's very small population, 4,500. It's in the heart of the South Carolina Sea Islands. And it's home to the unique Gullah Geechee culture. Now, the Gullah Geechee are direct descendants of slaves, primarily from West Africa. And they are unique among the U.S. because they were very isolated during the days of slavery, and even up until World War II because of their remote geography. So the plantation owners didn't stay in the summertime due to fear of jungle-related diseases. So the slaves actually managed and operated the entire plantation systems without any interference. And because of this, they maintained more of their Africanism than in any other part of America. So what you have is developed is a unique language, Creole, a kinship system, a very close connection to land and fishing. You have unique crafts, unique music and dance. And St. Helena Island is, sorry, that is where it's located. I thought I was on that slide. Flags of the Gullah people. St. Helena Island is also home to the Penn Center. It's originally the site of one of the country's first schools for freed slaves. And it was reorganized in 1950 around community development issues that were embedded in the civil rights era. It was one of the few places in the South where interracial groups could congregate, and they often hosted Martin Luther King Jr. And through the Penn Center's museum, classes, and monthly community sings, the Penn Center preserves and shares the Gullah Geechee culture with both the Gullah Geechee themselves and visitors. And in particular, the Penn Center's annual Heritage Day celebration draws 20,000 people from all over the country and world for the demonstrations of the Gullah art forms and the cuisine, and it has an estimated multi-million-dollar impact for the county economy. Now, Penn Center has always been a unique hybrid organization. It's not only doing cultural preservation in the museum sense, but it's active in community stewardship in the present day. So for instance, they've partnered with the USDA to help farmers market their products in farmers markets or on the internet. And over the last 30 years, St. Helena Island has faced increasing land development pressure. And they have, so Penn Center has led trainings and conversations with residents about a particular form of property ownership called heirs property ownership, tax abatement options. the advantage of leasing versus selling one's property. And they've worked with planners and political leaders to achieve a county-designated cultural conservation district to try to protect the island from outside investment. And it is a work in progress. There are opportunities to further increase support for artisans and farmers as entrepreneurs, whether they're boat and net makers, basketry makers, or doing music and dance. So currently, artisans might make a couple $1,000s over the 3-day festival through roadside stands to sell their artwork and quilts. And Penn Center also supports them through year-round through their gift shop. But there is this vision to turn the 50-acre historic district into a new Williamsburg, but not colonial actors, but have it be a living museum. And through this, to try to cultivate sustainable economic development opportunities for people that currently have to commute 4 hours a day by bus to Hilton Head Island for employment. So how can they cultivate tourism in their own backyard? And they've had a major success towards that vision. In 2017, Penn Center and the surrounding historic sites were designated a national monument to the Reconstruction era by presidential decree. So, and I wanted to close by returning to this question of where are you from? So, when I get asked this question, I think it's interesting. To some people that means where you were born. To some people that means where you live now. I've heard that if you live in New York City, that's the fastest place that people claim. They might have moved there a month ago. Where are you from? I'm from New York City. Yeah. Right? I did live in Brooklyn, and I did say I'm from New York City. Now I live in Easton, Pennsylvania, but I don't really feel like I can say I'm from there. So when people ask, I have to say I'm coming from Easton, Pennsylvania, or I live in Easton, Pennsylvania. And it does feel like home, but I'm not sure yet that I can say I'm from there. I've heard some people say you're not from a community unless you have like great-grandparents buried in the graveyard. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Yeah? I'm hearing chuckles. All right, so when is it that you can claim a place? And what are those factors that help cultivate belonging? So this is something that I'm really interested in. So I said that I evaded the question. And it's hard for me because I was born in New Jersey, and then I moved to Texas almost immediately, but I moved from Texas when I was 3. And then I lived in Connecticut from when I was kindergarten, 3 to high school. So a lot of people would say, oh, that's where you're from, that's where you're from. But I don't actually feel that connected to that hometown. I went to college in Ohio, and then I lived in Brooklyn and Minneapolis as an adult, and now I'm in Pennsylvania. But this is where I feel I'm from. This is my grandfather, my family farm, which actually is no longer in the family, sadly. But my great-grandfather bought the farm before the Great Depression. It's on the north shore of Long Island, nestled on the Nisququag River, near the Long Island Sound. And every summer, I spent there growing up. That is me in the mud puddle. And I also spent lots of work weekends as an adult. That's me on the tractor. But none of my family lives here anymore. The property was sold. The family is scattered around the country and globe. And furthermore, the area has really changed a lot since my great-grandfather's days. So it's really not, not the same place. I mean, now we don't even have that property. But this is Main Street in Smithtown, about 1.5 miles from the farm. But when you look at this picture, it can be anywhere. It's anywhere USA, right? So I think that I want to encourage everyone in this room, particularly those that are from Louisiana. I mean, people in Louisiana have some of the strongest connection to place and culture that I've ever seen. And you still have a lot of places that don't look like this, that have distinctiveness, and a lot of what is building that distinctiveness is the culture. So these unique assets are becoming even more valuable as so many parts of the country are becoming indistinguishable, becoming more and more fragmented. Now sometimes, we tend to think that change is inevitable. Sometimes it's growth, sometimes it's decline. But I think through creative placemaking, you have the power to have a coalition that puts you more in the driver's seat so that you can have a community-backed vision for the future of place. Now another thing that I learned about here in Louisiana is gumbo. And when I was growing up in school, I was told that America is a melting pot. People came in through Ellis Island, and now it's a melting pot. And for me, that conjures up the image of fondue. Does anyone else think about cheese fondue? Pile of melting cheese. So what I understand from my friends in Arnaudville is that gumbo is sort of the opposite of the melting pot. Because in gumbo, you can see these strands of unique traditions. So it's got African elements, it's got French elements, it's got Spanish elements, it's got Native American elements. And instead of becoming, a congealed pile of cheese in the melting pot, every flavor adds to the gumbo. And you can still identify them, but the whole is more delicious than any of it in isolation. So I think that that's a very important metaphor for as we change, how can we embrace change, but do so in ways that are inclusive of a lot of different cultural traditions and build the future that we want to build in a way in which the whole is more than the sum of the parts. The parts are still identifiable, and the whole is more delicious. Now I think I wanted to bring up a new thread. This is a new insight in my whole riff on gumbo that I just recently learned, but we've been talking a lot this week about erasure of some cultural traditions, and I understand that gumbo, a lot of times tourists or even Louisianans themselves may not think of all of those cultural traditions reflected in the gumbo. They might just think of it as sort of a white Cajun food, right? And so how do we find the ways to still honor and recognize all of the different elements in the gumbo? And that's a metaphor for our culture at large. And on that note, I wanted to just call everyone's attention that today is the opening of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, which is going to be the first museum ever in our country, or is the first museum ever in our country to honor the thousands of victims of lynching. It was driven by the Equal Justice Initiative, and the founder, Brian Stevenson, was quoted as saying, "I'm not interested in talking about America's history because I want to punish America. I want to liberate America." So I think that we should try to embrace our history, the good parts, like the gumbo, embrace the different cultural traditions, as well as the parts that are painful. And it's not about punishing, it's not about blame, but it's about the ability to move forward by giving space to trauma and by balancing history when the dominant narrative ignored or intentionally erased other parts of our cultural traditions that are just as important, just as rich. Some are painful, some are beautiful. So I will leave it at that. It's been a real pleasure to be back in Louisiana. Thank you so much for the invitation, and we can open it up to questions unless we need to move along for the next part of the agenda. I know. Okay, so 5 minutes. Any last comments or questions? And we could maybe turn on the house lights, or do you want to leave them? This last slide, which is now very hard to see, has my website, my company's website, metrisarts.com. So on that website, you can find our contact information. So if you're interested in finding out links to any of the case studies, or you want to contact them, please get in touch and I will connect you. You can also access the reports that we referenced through the presentation. If you'd like to join our mailing list or connect with us on social media, there are also links there. So yeah, metrisarts.com, everything should be available there. All right, well, thank you.